Welcome everybody. I'm Pietro Dupasani. I'm the current chairperson for Women in Mining South Africa. And I'd like to welcome you to I think it's our 4th Women's Month event. And when we were talking about what we were going to do for this Women's Month, one of the topics that I wanted to explore further, excuse me, because I've got a cat who wants my dinner. One of the topics that I wanted to explore further, and one of the questions that I got quite a lot is, because I'm a mentor to a couple of mentees, I normally take on a couple in a year, and I wanted to understand how I could be a better mentor. So what sort of some ideas that I could do to make it interesting for my mentees, and some of the potential discussion topics that we could have in our sessions. So I asked Briony if she would give us a masterclass on how to be a mentor, because we normally have a lot of events for mentees, and we actually have a fantastic mentee program happening at WIMSA this year. We started at the beginning of this year, and we have 42 amazing mentees who are doing peer-to-peer mentoring online every last Wednesday of the month. But we haven't done a class for mentors so that we can all become better mentors. And I think it's a really good skill to have in your repertoire of skills. So yeah, that's how this class came about. Just to introduce Briony, I don't think she needs a lot of introduction. I think a lot of people know her already because she's been our mentoring lead for quite some time. But she is a career and self-leadership coach. And she decided a couple of years ago, how long ago was it, Briony? I don't know, 10 years ago? 5 years ago. She decided she decided to leave her job in a career, or what can I say, for somebody else, and work for herself. And she's been building her own network of mentees and making a success of it. And she's also WIMSA's mentorship lead. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Briony, and she's going to take us through our masterclass for this evening. Thanks, Briony.
Thanks so much, Petra. Thanks for the introduction. I appreciate that. So it's lovely to be here with everybody. I was here last night, here being Zoom, with our mentoring group. And so it's nice to be able to follow up a mentoring session with a masterclass on how to make mentoring matter. And I want to ask, first of all, if you can, either in the chat or with a show of hands or with reactions, just show me who here is a mentor. It would be nice to see who's already mentoring people. So Nolene, Michelle, anybody else? Raksha? Okay, I'm sure we'll see Petro, Lafuna. Great. So we've got a few people who are mentoring now. And more hands going up. Brilliant. That's great. So in the chat, I'd love to hear some thoughts on why you mentor and what you struggle with as a mentor. So what you would really like to get out of today to get a better sense of how to make mentoring really matter. So just pop some words in the chat and I'll come back and have a look at those just now. Mentoring, I think, is a huge privilege, and it's something that most of us want to do at some point in our careers, because a lot of us get invested in by our bosses, our line function managers, people that we work with. And at some point, through gathering all of our experience and being invested in, we start to want to invest in others. But one of the things that I think most of us struggle with is that nobody really teaches you how to mentor, much the same as nobody really teaches you how to manage or be a leader. And for me, a lot of this is really about kind of your values and getting conscious. And so that's where I really want to start, is with the fact that most of us spend our lives being unconscious. And to be able to mentor people, I don't know which slide you're seeing. Are you seeing, which screen are you seeing? Are you seeing the slides?
Yeah, we're seeing them.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Great. most of us spend our lives kind of largely unconsciously. And what do I mean by that? No, we're not all asleep all the time, but in reality, we are actually asleep. And it's hard to mentor people when you're not conscious and awake and aware of how you're doing things. Why do I say this? We make 38,000 decisions every single day, and you're probably not aware that you make that many decisions because you make them unconsciously. Over time, as we start to do things more and more repetitively, we start to habituate so that we can free up our energy and our brain power to make more important decisions than should I use my right hand or my left hand to brush my teeth, and what am I going to wear today, and did I brush my hair or not? But those are all decisions that you're making every single day. And the same things happen in your work. When you become familiar with the work that you're doing and you do it for a long period of time, you start to become unconscious in the way that you do it. And the moment you start mentoring people, you need to get conscious again, because being able to communicate how you do things and transfer knowledge to others requires you to be conscious of how you do things. When you are unconscious in the way you do things, it's very hard to explain how you do it. And while you might give a conceptual understanding of how you do it, there are a lot of the minutiae that we often forget to communicate. And that's where the struggles come for many of our mentees. So that's the first point that I want to make, is we as mentors are operating unconsciously by the time we become mentors, and our mentees are very much unconscious too, because by the time they come to us as mentees, they're used to doing what they've been doing, and they're not yet aware of what they don't know in where they're going to. So we've got two sets of people coming into a relationship with a whole bunch of things that we're unconscious about, and it becomes very easy to miss each other in trying to communicate stuff. Does that feel familiar to anybody? Does that resonate at all? If it resonates, just say yes, or put up your hand. And if it doesn't resonate, let me know why it doesn't resonate. So I'm just having a look at the comments quickly. Yes, yes, okay, it resonates. That's great, thank you. Okay, so in the comments, Petra, I mentor to give back. Fantastic. I want to be the mentor that I wish I'd had in my earlier career. Mentoring online, what are the important lessons, as face-to-face talks are easier from an EQ perspective. Refilware says, I'm currently mentoring two ladies at work and struggling with having structure for the sessions, and going with the flow makes me feel uncomfortable. Fair enough. Michelle, need to learn more about how to mentor. Everyone requires different approaches and needs. Okay, great. So these are fantastic comments. Thank you. Give me a sense of where we're going. So your job as a mentor is to surface what your mentees cannot see and to help them become consciously competent. They don't know what they don't know. And until they can see what they don't know and ask the right questions, it's very hard to learn. But we all start the learning process. We all start something new with excitement and confidence, with anticipation. And what we go through is this transition journey of starting a new job, starting a new position, moving into the world of work, moving into being a mentor. And there's this anticipation and this excitement around what you're going to be able to give back, what you're going to be able to contribute, how you're going to use your skills and knowledge in your position. And as you go into that new position, you suddenly start to come up against things that you don't know how to do. And that's where the, oh my God, what am I doing, starts to kick in. And the, I don't actually know how to do this, starts to kick in. And the, oh, maybe I'm not as good as I thought I was. Maybe my university degree hasn't prepared me for the world of work, because it hasn't. Maybe moving from being responsible for myself to managing others hasn't prepared me for what I need to be able to do, because it hasn't. Maybe taking on this mentoring role, because I've got a lot of experience in the world of work, hasn't prepared me to mentor, because it probably hasn't. And so we go down into this kind of point of depression, which is not necessarily mental depression. It's kind of a disengagement and an exhaustion and a energy depression, as you start to realize that there's things you don't know. You go through that as a mentor, and your mentees go through that. And the reason I'm talking about this is, if you talk about this cycle with your mentees, you immediately start to normalize the fact that whenever we start something new, we anticipate it, we get excited about it, we have confidence, and then as we start to do it, we figure out that there's a whole bunch of things that we don't know. So having these conversations as a starting point with mentees is a great way of normalizing and surfacing that they're going to be on a learning journey just as much as you are. And on that learning journey and on that mentoring journey with you, they're going to go through these peaks and troughs, and that's normal. And that talking about this with you helps the learning journey. So the first thing that I like to do when I'm working with my coaching clients and with my mentees is to talk about this cycle, because the moment we make this explicit, the easier it is when your mentee shows up in a session and there's a bit of a brick wall up, or they don't seem able to communicate a concern. It's easy to go back to this and go, okay, where on this journey are you? What's going on? Are you in this space where you're not asking questions because you know the answers? Or you're on this downward curve where you're not asking questions because you're anxious about asking questions? Anybody kind of recognize this curve? Because this is not just a learning curve, this is also the grief cycle. And I think we've all gone through the grief cycle, probably a lot of us many, many, many times over the last year or two. And so the feelings of, I can't believe this is happening to me, I don't know what's going on here, I don't know how to get out of this, feel familiar. And then starting to adopt a point at which we go, okay, I'm now starting to learn. I'm starting to feel supported by my mentor, and I'm making a decision to take what they're sharing with me and integrate it into the way that I work. But this bottom part of the pit is the most important part in this journey. And your job as a mentor is to try and make this as short as possible. Get your mentees through this bottom part where they're going, I don't know what I'm doing, into experimenting and trying and integrating their learning. And the way to do that is to identify a point of control. So identify what is it within your mentee's realm of control that they can start controlling. So I just want to move from there, and I'm just going to stop sharing quickly. And I just want to get a sense in the comments or by a show of hands if this feels like a useful tool to you, or if you've got any questions about this transition journey as a tool to discuss. So Rafil says, I've been through this circle so many times in my career, I can relate. Wonderful. Rafil, do you want to share a story with us on how you relate to this?
Yes, good evening, ladies. I'm not sure if there are any gentlemen. As somebody that started as a graduate in training in the mining company, fresh from university, before going to university, I came from a rural area. That journey has been a roller coaster ride for me. There has been times where I feel like I am losing. I'm giving up on the journey, and I feel like this is just a useless exercise. And I only recently had a mentor in my career. I survived all along without a mentor until recently. So yeah, I can relate with this curve of up and down. There are days where I spent quite a lot of time at the bottom of the curve. And I pull myself up again. I get excited. I start experimenting about things. So I can relate fully with this.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well done. Thank you for sharing that. And the next key point for me is, if you can share stories like that with your mentees and demonstrate that you can relate with the journey that they're going through, it makes you a whole lot more valuable to your mentee. Because when your mentee is going through that down cycle of losing confidence, getting anxious, being scared of taking risks, being scared to ask questions, because that's what happens when we're going on that downward cycle. They don't know that you've been through this too. The moment you normalize it for them and tell them stories about how you've been through this cycle, how you started things really thinking you knew everything, and then suddenly the world kind of collapsed from under your feet and you realized you didn't, and what you learned in the process and how you got out of that, it starts to make you a real human being to your mentors or to your mentees. And one of the things that I'm experiencing is with generational gaps and diversity and cultural differences and communication differences, there are so many opportunities for us to misunderstand each other and to stop communicating because of those misunderstandings. And so as a mentor, the more you can normalize, the more you can ask questions, the more you can say, this is normal. It's okay to be going through this. In fact, it's not only okay, you should be going through this journey. The more your mentees are going to be able to open up and communicate and ask the right questions. Okay, so what's happening is the cycle, which is a typical learning cycle that we go through, and it also helps us identify how to lead and provide leadership. We start off with being in an unconscious incompetence space, where we've got low competence and low awareness. This space is that first part of the transition, where we're anticipating, we're excited, because we don't know what we don't know, okay? And so we're unconscious around how we're going to fail, where we don't have information, where we don't have experience. We think that we know exactly how to do things. And I remember this, being in this space so clearly. I remember getting my master's degree, being offered a job, and coming into my job in the first couple of weeks thinking, I am the hottest thing since sliced bread. I have a master's degree. I was offered this job. I was flown from Cape Town to Joburg for the job interview. And quite clearly, I'm just the most amazing thing. I didn't know what I didn't know. I had no idea that my master's degree had prepared me for literally nothing. And it took making some really big mistakes to move into the second box of conscious incompetence, where suddenly I knew what I didn't know. And I started to realize that I knew nothing. I was very conscious about how incompetent I was. And that's the downward part of that journey, where suddenly you go from thinking you know everything and being excited to realizing I'm not prepared for this at all. Once you've started doing some work, gaining experience, doing things repetitively, and honing your skills, you move into this conscious competence box where you know how to do the work, but it still takes a lot of energy. Remember those 38,000 decisions that I said we make every single day? You're consciously making decisions every single day on how to do your job. It hasn't become habituated yet, and making that many decisions can be exhausting. So in this box, we're starting to move through that bottom part of the cycle into an upward phase, because there's some confidence building, but it takes a lot of energy to get the work done well. And finally, we move into this unconscious competence space where we know how to do the work. It's easy. We don't have to think about it too much. But the danger of this space is we forget how we do things. And that's where most of us are as mentors, because we're doing our jobs without having to think too hard. And it's hard to communicate how we do things when we are trying to train somebody else. The thing is, we're in all four of these boxes all of the time, in different aspects of our lives, different aspects of our careers, different aspects of transitions that we're going through in our careers. And so are our mentees. And so when we bring all of these transitions together, it can create a lot of complexity. So again, this is a tool to use to communicate to your mentees, because it becomes a really valuable part of the conversation to get them to self-identify where they are on this graph, to get them to talk about why they think they're in that particular area and what they need to do to get to the next area. And I can almost guarantee you a lot of mentees are going to start out by saying, I'm consciously competent, I know what I'm doing. And in the second or third meeting, they're going to be going, actually, I might be consciously incompetent or completely incompetent. And the joy of this tool is being able, again, to normalize the fact that you go through this cycle all the time, that every time you start a new working relationship with somebody, you're going through this cycle. Every time you learn a new skill, transition into a new position, change companies, you start going through the cycle again. Who's come across this tool before? Nobody? Anybody? Can you see yourselves having a conversation using this tool? Okay, Pietro has, thank you. Pakama, I see in the comment you said, what would you advise a mentee who would love a new opportunity with a transition, but is struggling to break out of a current role? Okay, so I'm going to hold that as a question. We'll come back to that later. Okay, so the point for me is that this is, again, a very early conversation that you can have with your mentees about helping them become conscious on where they are in their learning cycle. It also gives you the opportunities to figure out what are the appropriate ways of engaging with them, okay? So when somebody's in an unconscious incompetence box, coaching them is not an appropriate way to do things because they don't know what to do. So assuming that they have the resourcefulness within them is not going to be helpful when they simply don't have the knowledge and the experience. This is where you want to be able to direct and tell your mentees how to do things, show them how to do things, take them through it step by step. And so understanding in their kind of collection of skills and experience what they're unconsciously incompetent on and where they are competent consciously or consciously incompetent helps give you a set of tools on how to communicate and how to transfer skills. If somebody is consciously competent and you're telling them what to do, it's going to be very frustrating. There, using coaching and more delegation of tasks becomes a more appropriate way to do things. And if there's something that somebody has already mastered, just give them the responsibility. But until you've gone through this exercise of actually explicitly talking about each of the competencies that they need to do their job and figuring out which of these boxes they're in, it's very hard to decide which approach to take. And I've seen a lot of times where a mentee will just put their back up or not say that they're not understanding what they're doing because they're starting to develop an anxiety in response to the way that communication is taking place. If there are any questions, please shout, otherwise I'm just going to carry on. The other thing that I want to highlight here is this acronym BEACS. And BEACS is an acronym for the dimensions of competence. So I'm going to move on to that because this is a third tool that I really want to encourage you to use with your mentees because it helps you to break down what specifically your mentee needs to focus on when it comes to building their competence. So often when we're talking about competence and gaining more competence, there's a focus on getting more knowledge, doing another course, studying something else. But studying is expensive and doing courses is expensive. And there are 4 other areas of competence that we can play with before investing in more studies. So I want to go through these, and the acronym BEACS is nice and easy to remember, but the behaviors part of BEACS is actually the one that I want to talk about last. So I'm going to talk about E first. E is for experience, okay? When your mentees come into the world of work, they've got lots of knowledge from their university degree, and they've got lots of experience in being students, but they don't have a lot of experience in the world of work. When they transition from managing themselves into managing others, they've got lots of experience of technically getting their work right, but they don't necessarily have the experience of managing other people. And so often where we can very quickly build up competence is by giving mentees the opportunity to get more diverse experience. If they've had the same experience over and over again, the key here is start diversifying that experience and having discussions with them around the variety of experience they need, the exposure that they need to other people, other teams, other resources, other mining methods, other ways of doing things, and helping them identify how to get that experience. Second one that I want to talk about is aptitude. So aptitude is your natural ability to be able to do something. And we all have natural abilities to do certain things and areas where we may be able to do something, but it doesn't come naturally to us. So being able to have a conversation around whether competence is being held back by a lack of natural aptitude, which can be compensated for by more intentional attention to that particular competence, is a conversation that starts to surface where the attention needs to take place. So for instance, I can do some mathematical equations, but it takes me a lot of effort. And if I had to be working in an area where I needed to improve my competence around maths, it wouldn't help me to be getting more experience. It wouldn't really help me to get more knowledge, but it would definitely help me to be far more intentional in taking care, in being more detail focused, in checking what I do more carefully, in asking for help. Okay. And these may be things where if somebody has got all of the knowledge and experience, but they don't necessarily have the aptitude for that particular task, they might need to look at where to be more intentional. Fourth area is knowledge. As I said, knowledge can be expensive to gain when it's through formal studies, but knowledge is everywhere. Okay. Knowledge resides in people, knowledge resides in books, knowledge resides all over the internet, and knowledge resides within the organization. And often we're focusing on the wrong places to get knowledge. So some of the questions with a mentee might be, what knowledge do you have that you can leverage? If you don't have that knowledge, who can you get that knowledge from? Who do you need to have conversations with? Who do you need to network with? Who do you need to build relationships with? What websites can you go to research for that knowledge? And from my perspective, most importantly, are you applying the knowledge? We often get caught up in having theoretical knowledge, but not actually applying it. And that's one area to have a conversation with a mentee about. Final one is skills. So often we have a skill and need to sharpen that skill, putting in more time, focusing on how to do things more efficiently, and looking for the opportunity to shine up a particular skill. So where the behaviors, the experience, the aptitude, and the knowledge are all there, it might be about just getting more hours on the job so that you become faster, it becomes easier to do, it requires less effort to do. And then the final one is around behaviors. And I think we all know that you can be as technically competent as you want, but if you are unable to show up, if you're unable to advocate for yourself, if you're unable to build relationships and communicate your value to people, often you can be the most technically competent person in the room, but nobody knows it if you're not communicating in a way that people understand. So the last one for me is, if your mentee has the experience, the aptitude, the knowledge, and the skills, but they're still not managing to move forward in their careers and they're not making a success of themselves, it might be around personal development and behaviors. Why am I talking about this? Because when you can identify which dimensions to be putting some attention into, it becomes a lot easier to focus attention on the right things. Okay, I've talked a lot. I want to know if there are any questions, any comments, any insights around this, any thoughts. Anybody got any thoughts that you'd want to share, or how you would use this as part of a conversation with your mentees? Is anybody still in the room? Have I put everybody to sleep?
I'm here.
Yay!
Me too.
Any thoughts?
Briony, it's Carla here.
Hi, Carla.
So I can't find a button where to put my hand up, so I'll just start talking. I've got more question. I don't know if it's relevant now for where you are in your presentation today, but I would like to know if you've got an individual and you're not sure what is the difference between coaching and mentoring. When do you refer somebody to mentor, and when do you refer somebody to be coached?
So for me, coaching is very much where people are consciously competent or unconsciously competent, okay? Because they've got the experience, but possibly need to build more awareness around themselves, okay? And coaching is very much about helping people think through things, not telling them how to do and advising. And the two techniques are very different. So if somebody hasn't got the experience, they're far more likely to need mentoring. They need being told how to do something, being shown how to do something, and really having a lot of kind of hands-on hand-holding to transfer the skills. So mentoring is a lot closer to training, whereas coaching is a lot closer to providing a platform where somebody can safely think for themselves. Carla, does that help?
Yes, it does. Thanks a lot.
Okay. So it doesn't mean that you can't use coaching techniques as a mentor, and I really think you should, because part of the job as mentoring is also helping your mentees to think through things for themselves. You don't want to kind of just spoon feed and shut down thinking. But if somebody doesn't know what they don't know, they're never going to know it unless you start mentoring. And by that, I mean showing and telling and demonstrating and hand-holding. And the longer somebody is in a relationship, a mentoring relationship with you, the more likely you're going to be to move over to coaching, where the meta skills are around asking open-ended questions, listening, providing different perspective, brainstorming, and really giving the mentee much more room to do the thinking for themselves, where you become a sounding board as opposed to being the person who's telling them what and how to do things. Rafiel, where I see you've said, I can see myself talking through these dimensions with one of my mentees. She's newly appointed in a foreman position, but feeling unsure of herself. So again, I'm going to ask you, Rafil, to tell us a little bit more about how you would use this.
Sorry, my 4-year-old just joined the meeting now. Yeah, my lady was a technician before, and she was more of a specialist in her role, and she was doing very well. And recently, she's now promoted into a foreman position. So I can see in my sessions that there are days where she's really feeling like, yo, I don't know what I'm doing. Do I even belong here? I think I will be able to encourage her to showcase her skills, because she was a technician in the field where she is a foreman. So there is a lot of valuable skills that she can tap in to showcase in the plant environment, especially when there are technical issues being faced in the department. So I can see myself beefing her up with this and cheering her on.
Yeah, and it's sharing stories with her about a time where you transitioned from being technically competent into a position where you needed a different set of competencies. Because what you're talking about here is she's transitioned into a position where she needs a different set of competencies. And yes, technical competencies are very different to managing people and managing projects and delegating and overseeing work. Very different sets of competencies. And so she's sitting in two boxes. She's probably sitting in unconsciously competent on a technical perspective and consciously incompetent when it comes to managing and overseeing. And so while she kind of knows that she should be confident on one respect, is feeling incredibly unconfident because she's doing a set of competencies that are new to her. Normalize it, make it clear that this is a very normal part of the process, and that if she wasn't going through this, there would actually be something wrong, because what she would probably be doing is dismissing and diminishing the learning process that she's going through. Yusavia, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, hi, Briony. So Briony, as you know, I've started some formal mentorship in the last year, right? That's through the company program that Anglo started. And what I found is that I did find that one of my mentees was unconsciously incompetent. And through starting this formal mentorship, I suppose I was also unconsciously incompetent as a mentor, because I found that when I found this area, or I identified it, when I started talking to her about it, I went almost into preaching mode, and I could see she got very disengaged. So the next time I changed the approach into more the open-ended, but then it's like she's wading through the dark, right? So how do you really balance these two approaches to make sure that the person is still engaged and you're giving them new insight, but in a way that is also encouraging self-discovery? I haven't mastered that balance, and I just want to find out, your insight on that.
It's a tough one to master, Yusavia, because what you're doing is having a bit of a dance with somebody. And when you're dancing with a partner, you've kind of got to build rapport, right? And sometimes you step on each other's toes, and sometimes you do the wrong steps and the dance kind of collapses. And to me, that's the point at which you kind of need to laugh at yourselves and recognize that you're both working through this together and figuring things out together. I think it's really important to recognize that you don't have to have all the knowledge, and you don't have to have all the answers, and neither does she, but that together you can think things through. So once you've realized together that somebody is unconsciously incompetent, it's important to kind of be explicit about that. And that might be your unconscious incompetence as well as hers. The moment you're vulnerable with a mentee, the more likely they are to be vulnerable back. And And the more vulnerability there is in the relationship, the easier it is to actually communicate with each other. But I would say a combination of open-ended questions and closed questions and transferring knowledge is really what you need to be looking at. But using that tool around the competence model to really get her to be talking around where she thinks she is, why she thinks she is there, and using that in combination with the Beaks tool to say, okay, in these 5 dimensions, what's the evidence that supports you saying you're competent here? Okay, and which of these dimensions can we work on? Because it's very unlikely that if somebody is with you in a mentoring relationship, that they are unconsciously competent in everything. They're going to be in all 4 of those boxes, and the kind of the light for them is figuring out that they're in all 4 of those boxes, and that's okay. I don't know if that helps you, Yosavia. It's a tough question to answer.
No, it does help me, Briony, because I think I never saw it as she could be in all of these places at once, and maybe just going with a unidirectional approach, even if it was just for a period, you know, wasn't the right strategy. But I think to your point that building of rapport is important, and I had done that over the relationship, and it had melted a lot of that initial discomfort, but it still does happen time and time again. So I definitely think that those tools are very useful. So thanks for that.
Okay. You know, we're constantly having to rebuild rapport. The moment we use the wrong approach, it kind of breaks trust a little bit, and we have to recontract with each other. And that kind of takes me to what I actually want to talk about, and I think is going to help with structuring and what's in and what's out, because there have been a few comments in the chat around where's the line between career and personal, and how do we make this structured? How do we do that? So from my perspective, the most important starting place in any relationship, whether it's a mentoring relationship, whether it's a work relationship, whether it's a personal relationship, is actually being explicit in how you want the relationship to be. Because we tend not to have these conversations, and then things get messy, and then it's really hard to have the conversation. So when you have the conversation up front and you take the first mentoring session, or maybe even the first 2 mentoring sessions, to design the quality of your relationship together, it gives you the opportunity to start building the rapport, building how you're going to relate to each other, and what's in the relationship and what's out of the relationship, how you're going to engage with each other, and most importantly, what sort of difficulties might arise in the relationship and how you're going to deal with those. And so there's a kind of a series of conversation questions that you can have. But the most important thing is that this is co-created, that it's not just you saying this is how I want the mentoring relationship to be, but that each of you have the opportunity to talk about and identify the qualities that you want, and then be very clear on what the behaviors will be that are going to uphold the qualities of that relationship. And there's 3 key questions here, and then several others that you can add. The first one is, what kind of personality do we want this mentoring relationship to have? And I think personality is a nice word. But it's essentially, we're talking about the qualities. And if you think about different relationships that you've had, I think you can immediately identify that each of those relationships has a particular personality. Some relationships are fun and they're flirty and they're silly, but they're also professional at the same time. Other relationships can be really formal and really kind of clinical, and there's no laughter and there's no kind of interaction. It's can be quite one-sided. And those can work for different parties, but if they haven't been co-created and agreed together, they might be working for one party and not the other. So the first part of this is what personality we want this relationship to have. And the way I do it is get people to put on post-it notes all the different qualities that they want. So it might be confidential, fun, professional, honest, vulnerable, curious, a learning relationship. And once both parties have got all of their words on different post-it notes, put them together and start looking at them. Start looking to see where are the similarities, and discuss, what do these words actually mean? Okay, so what does fun look like in a mentoring relationship? What does curiosity look like in a mentoring relationship? What does a learning relationship look like? And that starts to unpack each party's understandings of these words. Once you've got that common understanding, you can start talking about, okay, so what are the behaviors? Because it's very easy to have these values or these qualities, but not actually know how to uphold these qualities through the way we do things. And so it might be, well, if we're going to have a vulnerable or an honest or a confidential relationship, that means I need to do certain things. I need to be a certain way. We both need to be a certain way. And once you've established what these behaviors might be and what they look like, then you start having a common understanding of how to be in this relationship. The final part of it is when things get difficult, and things do get difficult, especially because we are in a country where we have lots of different cultures, lots of different belief systems, lots of different generations working together. And so it's very easy for us to misunderstand each other. And often what happens is you may say something that has great intentions behind it, but your mentee might hear it as something completely different. Or they may interpret your body language as saying something and misinterpret what you're actually saying. And I can think of an example, for instance. So I was working with one of my mentees. We were talking about a topic. I'd been talking for quite a while, and I was watching her body language, and I could see her face kind of looking very serious and to me, almost kind of serious, a bit disengaged. She was kind of looking to the side a little bit. There wasn't any eye contact. And at some point, I was starting to feel really anxious because I thought, maybe I'm boring her. Maybe I'm not making sense. Maybe I've lost her completely. And my inner critic started kind of having this whole conversation with me about how useless I am as a mentor and all sorts of things. And I could have listened to my inner critic and given up. But what I chose to do in the moment was say to her, I'm looking at your face and I'm getting this feeling that you're really disengaged. And she looked up in absolute surprise and said, I'm not disengaged. I'm thinking about what you're saying. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about how to apply this. And so the point that I'm making here is that when things get difficult, we sometimes act in a way that makes things more difficult. And so one of the kind of relationship agreements might be, when I'm reading your body language and I'm starting to hear my inner critic kind of getting out of control, I need to state, this is how I'm feeling, or this is what I'm interpreting, and I just want to check in with you whether I'm actually seeing the right thing. Okay? So what I want to do at this point is give you an opportunity to go into small breakout rooms for 10 minutes. and practice developing a relationship agreement with each other. So 3 questions. What quality do we want this relationship to have? What are the behaviors that are going to uphold this relationship qualities? And what's one thing that might come up as a difficulty and how we're going to deal with that in the moment? Okay, so I'm going to make breakout rooms really quickly. I'm going to put 2 people per breakout room. And you've got 10 minutes to come up to develop your own relationship agreement with each other. Okay, happy? Yes, Briony, we're thrilled. Off you go. All right, welcome back. So, what's it like designing a relationship agreement with each other, especially with people that you potentially could be in a mentoring relationship with and don't know yet? Anybody? So my inner critic is going wild at the moment. Nobody's responding. I must be very boring. I think I've lost everybody. What's going on? Lauren.
Hi, Briony. You haven't lost any. You haven't lost anyone. We're still here.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that was an interesting exercise. I'm going to switch on my camera and look hard, but it's fine. You guys will just deal. I know. I know. Yeah, I think I was in a group with you, Savia, and we did the qualities, behaviors, and we sort of didn't get to the 3rd point, but we started with, you know, what qualities do we want, and confidentiality came up as a big one, and then, you know, having sort of, you know, a sense of humor and having fun in the relationship as well, and then definitely having a sense of transparency and honesty, because it's sort of futile if you're not honest with each other. And I think where I struggled was, is this a quality or is this a behavior?
They're going to intermingle, so don't get too caught up in the nuances of it. But it's, you know, what's important is making sure that both parties understand what it looks like to have fun, to be confidential, to be curious with each other.
Yeah. And then when we got to the behaviors, we said, okay, it's important to ask for help both as a mentee and as a mentor, because you're not going to know all the answers all the time. It's important to honor agreements, and that means you be on time for the meeting, or you notify, I'm going to be able to make it. I'm not going to be able to do something that we had agreed on. And then also to evaluate yourself and, you know, do the introspection. It's not always easy, but it has to be done.
Yeah. And so now things that you can add to that are what's in this relationship and what's out. So it speaks to the question that was in the chat earlier around, where's the boundary between career mentoring and personal? That's for the 2 of you to decide. Okay?
Yeah.
You're 2 humans coming to a relationship. It's very hard to separate personal from being a human being. But there are going to be things that maybe as a mentor, you don't feel comfortable dealing with. It's important to make that clear and discuss that and agree that in this relationship agreement. If you discuss it up front, it's a hell of a lot easier than one day your mentee coming to a session and going, I'm having this personal crisis. I'm not talking about that. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, no. So we did say that, you know, when things do get difficult, it's sort of too late to set the boundaries. The boundaries need to be set way up front. And then when things do get difficult, you know how to deal with that according to the boundaries that you have set.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's about setting boundaries, but it's also about being explicit about things that could come up, so that you have a common understanding early on. And that when there's a misunderstanding at some point, you've got that common understanding to come back to, that you can recalibrate against and that you can recontract against. I'm seeing Karabo say here, commitment to the relationship is also important. Absolutely. what I see as commitment to the relationship might be very different to what you see as commitment, Karabo. And so being clear about what does commitment look like is the discussion around what are the behaviors that uphold this quality of commitment in our relationship, okay? And you can bring anything you want into this discussion. So it's gonna not just be what personality do we want the relationship to be, but what do we talk about? What do we not talk about? How do we meet? When do we meet? Can we WhatsApp each other in between kind of formal sessions? Do we have walking meetings, or are they always going to be sitting in a room together? And whatever else comes to mind, you can keep on recontracting this. But the more effort you put into this, the more you're going to build rapport early on, and the more likely you're going to have a good quality relationship over the course of time. There's a couple other things that I want to touch on that I've already kind of alluded to in many ways, so I'm going to go through these quite quickly. Get conscious about what you've learned, okay? How did you get where you are? What questions do you wish you had known to ask when you were where your mentee is right now? How could you have done things differently? Start thinking about those things as you go into a mentoring relationship. The more conscious you are about what you've learned and how you got to where you are, the more value you're going to be able to contribute to your mentee, and the more they're going to know that what they're going through is normal. I want to ask you in the chat box to just type in there a response to this question number 6 here. So what questions would you ask now that you know the answers to those questions? And to me, this is a really important one, because this is about helping your mentee get out of unconscious incompetence as quickly as possible by knowing what questions to ask, knowing that it's okay to ask a question. In the mentoring session we had last night, there were quite a few mentees who were saying things like, I didn't know it was okay to ask that. Or I didn't understand what my mentor meant by this. What do you think she meant? And so we spent a lot of time unpacking what the questions that she could have asked her mentor in a one-on-one mentoring session that she'd had. And so the more you can start thinking about questions that you'd wish you'd asked earlier in your career or known to ask, the more likely your mentee is to be able to ask those questions. The next one I want to talk about is listening for what's not said, and I've alluded to this already. When we listen, we often listen at an internal level, and what that means is we're listening to our inner critic, okay? We're listening to, oh, I'm not sure that this is going well, and oh, I better respond to that, or oh yes, I remember a time that happened to me, I must tell this story. And in the process of listening to what is going on inside us, rather than focusing on the mentee, we often lose what the mentee is saying, and we lose the opportunity to connect with what they're actually asking. We also tend to focus more on people's words than we do on understanding whether there's a connection between their words and their body language. And we can very easily misunderstand each other's words and tone and pace and the way that they're communicating, and misunderstand body language. And so when we're focusing more on the mentee and trying to create a composite picture of what the mentee is saying, it gives us the opportunity to say, this is what I heard you say, but I'm seeing your body saying something else. It's confusing. What's going on here? Okay? Because if we don't surface and make explicit those sorts of confusions, it's very easy to go off on a tangent, or to put up a brick wall, or to get irritated with a mentee, or to miss what they're actually asking. And so being able to very consciously step away from wanting to respond and wanting to kind of process and think and kind of find a relevant example and actually just listen and ask questions and listen to what's said as well as what's not said, what the feeling is in the room. Listening to your intuition gives you a much better opportunity to really get to the heart of what's going on with your mentee. When we talk about mentoring, we often talk about mentoring sessions. We'll meet once a month or once a week, or we'll have a kind of weekly phone call. We will mentor in these sessions. But what I think we often forget is that our mentees and all the other mentees in the company are watching us all the time. And so modeling, being clear on what you're modeling outside of your mentoring sessions becomes really important. Being intentional in how you show up every single day, in thinking through how what you say, what you do, how you interact with people, how you make decisions are all being absorbed by your mentees. And that it's not just the mentoring session that matters, it's everything that you do. While we're working from home, there's a lot of things that you can model in the way that you communicate with people. When we're back in the office, there's a huge amount of information that you share with people just by how you show up in the organization. And starting to be very clear on that and at what you want to model to your mentees in and out of sessions is important. Somebody mentioned this earlier, asking open-ended questions. When we ask open-ended questions like who, what, when, where, and how, we open up the opportunity to have a conversation and explore things more deeply. When we ask closed-ended questions, so questions that are going to be answered with yes or no, or maybe, or I don't know, we end up shutting down the conversation. So replace things like, did you understand that, with what was your understanding of that? Tell me what you got from this conversation. What are the sorts of insights that you had? Who should you be going for help to? Not, do you know who to go and speak to? How will you take this further? Versus, okay, so do you know what to do next? And often, and I find myself all the time asking closed-ended questions when I'm not intentionally making sure that I ask a who, what, when, where, or how. And you might have noticed I've not included why as an open-ended question. And the reason for that is why most often raises people's defenses, because why can be a very judgmental question. Why did you do that? Often gets asked with a tone of, but why? Judgmentally. Whereas, what was the process that you were going through when you did that? Very different tone, very different quality of answer. And why can often be responded to with, well, just because, which is just as bad as yes or no, or maybe, or I don't know. Whereas, what was your thinking process, or how were you going about doing this, results in a very different answer. So try and be as open-ended as possible and give your mentee the opportunity to talk through their thinking rather than justifying their thinking or shutting down their thinking with closed-ended questions. Oh, sorry. Curiosity can look very different for different people. And we often can assume that somebody is not curious when their version of curiosity doesn't look like ours. So I'm not a thrill seeker at all. I have no curiosity around jumping out of a plane or ice mountain climbing or anything like that. I'm just not into thrills, and I have no curiosity about going underground. But I'm very curious about people. So my brand of curiosity can look very different to the curiosity of people like Nolene and Pietro, who, as far as I know them, are quite thrill-seeking. They jump off cliffs with their hang gliders, Nolene, Pietro. Pietro goes motorbike riding. They do all sorts of things. They have a curiosity around thrill that I just do not have. Pietro or Nolene, were you jumping in there?
That was me. I was going to say paraglider.
Paragliding, thank you. Anything that's in the air is jumping off a cliff as far as I'm concerned. The point here is that you want to cultivate curiosity in your mentees. And so firstly, getting a sense of what they're curious about, what their curiosity looks like, what they're not curious about, and how that lack of curiosity might block them in their learning journey are important conversations to have. And I can send you an article that outlines these dimensions of curiosity, or you can go and have a look at Todd Kashdan's work. It's really insightful in terms of giving a sense of how each of these dimensions looks completely different, but in the learning process and in going through our career journeys, the more we can cultivate of each of these, the more we can open up our learning process and expand our repertoire of experience. So a question around what makes you curious might be a really nice question to have, or a discussion to have with a mentee. Speaking to your mentee's potential, your words matter, and we use words sometimes very unintentionally. Our words convey all sorts of meaning consciously and unconsciously. And so being able to speak to your mentee's potential, I know you can do this, let's work through this together, is very different to, okay, let me just tell you the answer. They have very different implications and they're received very differently. And so look for as many opportunities to think something through because you believe in your mentee's potential to think it through for themselves, as opposed to giving them the answer before they've had the opportunity to do some thinking for themselves. Empower your mentees through a journey of low stakes risk taking. What do I mean by this? We all know our comfort zones, okay? And in a conversation we had last night, somebody was talking about taking a leap. Okay, she wanted to leap from being employed to being an entrepreneur. She's seen an opportunity and she said, somebody said to me, just do it. And so how do I know when it's time to just do it? The key here is that those people who look like they're just doing it are people who've often built up a foundation of experience and networks and knowledge and skills. They've taken time to build a foundation before they take what looks like a leap. And so very often our mentees are taking leaps because that's what they are seeing others doing, without understanding that there's been a whole series of work done before that leap gets taken. And what happens is when you leap far out of your comfort zone into something completely unknown, it can be a very scary experience. And if it doesn't go right, it can end up with your mentee coming straight back to their comfort zone and not wanting to put a single step out again. This is often what happens as well to us when we're delegating tasks. We delegate something way too big, the mentee fails at it, and we learn as mentors, just don't delegate, do it myself. It's not worth giving this away to somebody to do. And so here in these pictures, the equivalent is getting somebody who's never climbed before to suddenly be climbing ice cliffs, okay? The natural progression is start learning a little bit about climbing in a safe environment. Climb a few meters before suddenly you're climbing mountains, before suddenly you're using all these kind of new techniques, and before you're expected to climb an ice cliff, okay? So look for ways to expose your mentees to a little bit at a time. Tiny little kind of step out of a comfort zone increases the size of the comfort zone. It increases confidence. And slowly but surely, over a journey of low stakes risk-taking, it becomes possible not just to delegate a full suite of tasks, but your mentee is suddenly looking back and realizing how far they've come. And that boosts confidence as well. But I think we often fall into this trap of, I've got so much on my plate, let me just give this person a huge chunk to do. And well, if they fail, they fail. But while failure is important, we all need to fail because that's often where we learn. Really big failures in really complex organizations in a fast-moving environment can erode somebody's confidence very quickly. I've got 2 further slides and then I'm done. Help your mentee develop an enterprise perspective. And what I mean by this is help your mentee get a sense of where they are in relation to the bigger organization, how what they do impacts on others and how others' work impacts on them. So often we step out of our way to help others when we understand who they are. But it becomes very hard sometimes to go out of our way in organizations when we don't understand who that organization is, who the people are, what they value. And so quite a nice exercise to do with your mentees in helping them develop an enterprise perspective, in helping them put the enterprise, the organization first, is an exercise in getting clear on the values of the organization, not what's on the posters on the wall, but what they actually observe in terms of people's behaviors on a daily basis and their values, what they value, what they're trying to develop in their careers, okay? So if you observe in the organization that people work long hours and they dedicate a lot of time to getting the work right, how does that overlap with your value of wanting to get as much exposure and build your career really quickly? You're going to find an overlap when you have that conversation with a mentee around how the organization's values and dedicating yourself to doing the work well and putting in extra personal hours is going to help get as much experience. It's going to help you be seen in the organization. It's going to help you be seen as somebody of value. And that putting that first for a period of time in your career may be what contributes to your career growing, as opposed to putting only what you want ahead of the organization. I don't know if that makes sense. My inner critic at this point is saying I'm talking too much and that maybe I am losing people. So I'm just going to stop there for a moment. Thank you, Nolene, for the thumbs up. Okay. Final point I want to make is help facilitate relationships for your mentees. By the time you're mentoring somebody, you probably know a lot of people in the organization. You know a lot of people outside of the organization. And even though a lot of us aren't kind of great at networking, or we always say we don't enjoy networking, a lot of what we do is about building relationships and networking with people naturally. But if you think back to being a younger version of yourself, perhaps networking and starting conversations and introducing yourself to people wasn't as easy as it is now. And so one of the most valuable things I think you can do for your mentees is introduce them at every possible moment. When you're on a Zoom webinar and your mentee, bring your mentee along, mention them in the session. When you are at a meeting, take them along, introduce them as your mentee. When you post something on LinkedIn, talk about your mentee at every possible opportunity, shine a light on them and give them the opportunity to be seen by others. Make as many introductions as you can. when you're talking about somebody as your mentee, it immediately infers that this is somebody that you're proud of, that you're willing to speak up for, and that gives them credibility in the network. Very different to saying, mentee, go and introduce yourself to somebody else. They've got no context with which to do that. The moment you make that introduction or shine a light on them, it makes their lives a hell of a lot easier. Okay, that is my last slide. I think the final thing I want to say in wrapping this up is mentoring is a huge responsibility. It's something I think a lot of us aspire to, but it's not always something that we realize comes with a lot of responsibility. But it also comes with the opportunity to learn a lot, not just for the mentee to learn, but for you to learn about yourself, about your mentee, about a completely different generation. And I have to say, in the mentoring program that we're doing with women in mining at the moment, I think the mentors are learning way more than the mentees possibly are, because we're getting the opportunity to gain insights and conversations around stuff that maybe we're a little bit more removed from. And so I think one of the joys of mentoring is being able to gain those insights, get in contact with things that maybe we don't deal with on a daily basis. And for me, get in contact with ourselves as well, because in the process of imparting your knowledge and your experience to somebody else, you really have to get conscious about your learning again. And that's a process that awakens learning in you as you're remembering how you've gone through doing something. Okay, I feel like I've talked a lot. Michelle's asked, how long should a mentor-mentee relationship be? My answer would be as long as it needs to be, as long as it's useful to both of you, as long as you're both getting something out of it. I think that's something to talk about in your relationship agreement up front, is how long are we going to do this for? What are the objectives of this mentoring relationship? What do you want to get out of it? Can I contribute to those things? But every relationship, mentoring relationship, coaching relationships, they all run their course. And when you no longer have something that you can mentor on, or your mentee has got what they need from you, the relationship can end. It doesn't have to end in a difficult way. And I think starting up front by saying, this relationship is going to run its course, so let's decide together on what that's going to look like, helps the relationship to find its natural ending far more powerfully than if it just kind of dribbles to an end because both of you have lost interest in the relationship. Any other questions? Any other thoughts? Any other needs? I'm going to take that as a no. I hope you got value out of this, and that there will be things that you can take and apply. I'm going to convert my slides into a PDF, and I'll make sure that those get shared on the WIMSA LinkedIn page. And then we have recorded this, so Nikki will edit it in the next couple of days and put it up on our YouTube page. So thank you for listening, for being here, and yeah, all the best with your mentoring relationships.
And thanks very much to you, Briony, for sharing all of your wisdom. And we'll see you at the next event, everybody.